Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Talk Your Tail Off podcast. I'm your host, Vanessa, more commonly known as Girl with the Dogs, and for today's episode, I am going to be interviewing Hillary Wolfe, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. She focuses on nutrition, and she will be answering the controversial question, is kibble killing my pet? Before we get started, I'd like to encourage you all to join this community by hitting that subscribe button. And if you're interested in the products that I know and love for pet grooming, you can check out my website, girlwiththedogs.com, and use code TALKTAIL for 10% off your first order. Now let's dive in to today's episode. But anyways, hi Hillary, it's really nice to meet you.
Hi, yes, so good to talk with you. I'm so excited.
Let's start by you introducing yourself. What made you decide to become a veterinarian? Where you went to school? Anything you think is relevant, I will let you have the mic.
All right, well, I'm Dr. Hillary Wolfe. I'm a veterinarian and I'm a certified food therapist for pets. I went to vet school in Kansas, very far away from my hometown, Orlando, Florida. And really becoming a vet was kind of an interesting decision for me because I didn't really have much of a decision. It was kind of like I just knew I wanted to do it. But I grew up with a mom who was an RN, so I grew up very interested in the medical field. She would always teach me things and show me things about human medicine, but I knew I didn't want to work on people. So it kind of was just a natural progression to be like, let me work on animals because they're awesome. I love them. And I just have a very scientific brain. So it kind of just fit together to put those two things together and become a vet.
For those listening who might have the idea of becoming a vet or simply working in the veterinary industry, whether that is, being a tech or being an assistant, what could you tell them so that they can prepare for going to school?
I think being realistic in the sense that it's not going to be easy. Not one single part of it will be easy. It's a huge time commitment and a huge money commitment. The student loans are no joke. So you have to go into it for the right reason, right? And I think, loving animals is a really important part of it, but you have to have more than that. I mean, you want to have to be able to help the people as well that come along with the pets. And again, have that scientific part to your brain. It's not just like, oh, I love animals, but I love science and I really want to dig in deep because you are going to learn every single intricate detail about an animal and all of the animals. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of studying. I mean, I would go home after school, having been there from 9 to 5 and study all night. And I would study all day on the weekends. And really, it's a full-time job. I would say it's even double a full-time job. But if you love it, it's so fun. I mean, I absolutely loved vet school and every second of it, really. So if it's what you love, I would say go for it. But just know the time and the money expectations for sure.
Now, you're in the United States. I'm in Canada. So I know what it costs here, but I don't know what vet school costs in the United States. Do you feel comfortable telling us how much someone could anticipate to pay for school in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the state, but it also depends on if you're in state or out of state, because out of state tuition is double in state. So I went out of state, and at the time I was in vet school in 2015, it was $50,000 a year. So I graduated with a lot of debt, and it accrues interest while you're in school. So I graduated being out of state with 250,000 in debt.
Wow.
So it's not a cheap school. No. Yeah, it's similar, comparable to a human medical school.
And do you work for yourself? Do you have your own practice now? Do you work for a practice?
My situation is a bit unique. So I was an associate veterinarian that you would see at your typical vet visits for the first 4 years of my career. And then I went into relief work where I just kind of travel around and I fill in at vet clinics who need me. Like if they have somebody on maternity leave or they're just short a vet, I would fill in. And so I did that full time for several years. And then over the past actually just a few months, I transitioned mostly out of that. I work in the clinics about 2 to 3 times a month. And the rest of the time I do my nutrition business full time, working for myself.
So that is basically the whole point of this podcast today is really to talk about nutrition. And obviously, that's the reason I chose you. Now, I found you on Instagram. I was really excited when I found you on Instagram because it is very difficult to find a vet that advocates for fresh food. The majority of the vets, I don't know if it's just where I'm located, but the majority of the vets here, everybody advocates for kibble. It can be a bit of a taboo subject to talk about homemade food or even raw food as well. So it was very refreshing to see your profile and to see how much effort you're putting into nutrition. So let's talk a little bit about why you decided to specialize in nutrition. Is that what I would say, specialize? You specialize in it?
I wouldn't necessarily use the term specialized just because I am not a board certified specialist, which is like the highest of levels when it comes to nutrition. But I do have a special interest in nutrition and I have a lot of certifications. So I guess as far as my journey goes, it's kind of interesting. I think there's different angles that or different like events, I guess, that happened over the course of a few years that just all ended up coming together and that kind of led me down that path. But one in particular is I personally had been diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome in 2016. And I was just told by doctors, like, take these drugs and just kind of deal with it. And I'm just not really someone who wants to just take drugs and deal with something. So I looked for alternative methods of treating myself. And I found nutrition was one of the ways. And so I completely changed my diet. And over the course of maybe like 2 years, I was actually completely cured of the issue I was having. All my hormones, everything was back to normal. And it was just through food. I took no drugs. And so I started to just kind of think like, that's interesting. Like maybe we can do that for animals, but I didn't know anything about that at the time. But then in 2019, my dog Riley passed away from stomach cancer at the age of 12, which is pretty young for a miniature pinscher. And I just was like, was there something I did? Was there something I didn't do that I should have done? Like, how could I have prevented this? And just so happens 2020 hits, COVID comes, and I have a lot of free time on my hands. And I'm like, let me just learn about nutrition and take some certifications. So I just started out like a very basic, like entry-level certification program. And my mind was like blown at the things I learned that I didn't know about. And it just took off from there. And I've literally been in certification programs since 2020. I just keep doing one after the other because I love it so much. And that's why I'm here now.
As a pet owner, thank you. Seriously, thank you.
You're welcome.
Because the amount of vets that I see on social media that, well, okay, let me rephrase that. The amount of people that post on social media, I feed my dogs this home cooked meal, or I feed my dogs this raw diet. The amount of vets that will respond back to that, even in the comments, basically saying how wrong it is. Now, we're going to get into more details of how it can be wrong and why it can be wrong. But they comment on it, and we get a lot of people responding saying, you didn't learn a lot about nutrition in vet school. And the vets will argue and say, no, we had a whole section on nutrition. So I would love to hear from you how much you felt that you learned about nutrition while you were at school.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that is super common, right? To hear that kind of comeback of like, well, you don't know. You didn't learn anything about nutrition. And I think that, I mean, I can speak from my personal experience, what I actually went through in my schooling is like, we did learn about nutrition, but I graduated with pretty minimal knowledge, especially compared to what I know now. Like what I actually knew then was very minimal. But we learned about it in every class, like especially internal medicine, when we learned through, the different disease processes, we'd learn about different types of diets that could help with that, or different nutritional things that could, help manage the pet. But when I graduated, the extent of my knowledge really was like, which prescription diet do I prescribe for these pets that have this condition? I didn't really know anything about like fresh food therapy. So it's going to vary by school. Every curriculum, like there's not a standard curriculum in every single school. Some veterinary schools are going to learn way more. Maybe they even have like full classes on that, or even rotations in their clinical year. My school didn't really have that. We didn't have like a nutrition rotation in clinical year, but we did learn about it, in our coursework.
And how I learned about what you just said was my dog struggled with chronic ear infections the first 2 years of her life, my shepherd. And my vet actually said to me that it could be diet related. And she said to me, we didn't learn much about nutrition in vet school. And that was the first time that I heard something like that, and hearing it from my vet was very shocking to me, but then also not shocking because, as you just said, you had a medical problem. And when you went to your doctor, they're like, here's all the medication to help you with that. But nobody tells you you could potentially solve your medical issues through food. So it's very, a lot of pet owners don't know this information. And that's really why I wanted to interview you, because I think that it's going to really open the eyes of a lot of people that listen to this, because nutrition is key. It's the most important part, right?
It is. Yep, absolutely.
So you run a nutrition business. Explain a little bit about your business, how it works, and how people can contact you for their pets.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started it, I was really just doing kind of group work. Like I created a course for pet parents to take that just teaches them everything they need to know, like how to pick a Kibble brand or a fresh food brand and how to read the labels, just to like get confusion off the table for so many people. So that's kind of how it started. So that's still running. People can enroll in my course, but I started opening up one-on-one consultations like a year or two into my business. And so that's where I'll meet with clients like virtually. I also do in person if I'm working in the clinic, but we'll meet virtually, talk with their pet for about 30 minutes when it comes to like their history, their medical history, their dietary restrictions that they might have or preferences, the owner's preferences as well. Because that's important too, is like, what can the client handle? If they do want a home cook, do they need an easy crock pot recipe, or can they do something more elaborate? So we kind of just narrow down all those details. And then I either make a commercial diet plan for them, whether that's Kibble, fresh food, or I'll make custom homemade recipes. But I always work with their veterinarian. We never do anything apart from their primary vet. It's really important that I get like the medical records and approval from them to make sure the pet's healthy and that we're doing the right and the best thing for that animal.
So, for those listening, I did meet with Hillary for my own dogs to get a diet plan put in place. And I was very impressed by your lengthy questionnaire and the fact that you needed my vet references. You had to call them, you had to talk to them, make sure my pets are healthy, because I think that if anybody is giving out just meal plans to clients, it could potentially cause harm, because meal plans need to be designed around the pet's individual needs. And I am a true believer that there is no one diet that fits all, right? So while I am an advocate for the raw diet, I am also an advocate for fresh cooked home diet. We're going to get into that in a minute, but I want to talk to you a little bit about, my God, the question just slipped my mind. Oh, what are your thoughts on Kibble? Because the main question here that everybody is wondering is Kibble killing my pet?
That's a common question that I get, right? And I think that the thing we have to really look at is, what is the research telling us? Like, that's, as a veterinarian, that's what I've been always trained to look at, is like research or evidence-based medicine, right? And so there's no research to tell us that. Like, we don't have longevity studies on the difference between a dog who's fed fresh food their whole life and a dog who's fed Kibble their whole life. Maybe we will eventually, but think like how long that takes, right? Decades upon decades to get that information. So it'll be interesting to see if we do get like longevity studies. But, you know, for me personally, like, my philosophy is the more fresh food that I can eat, the better. So it's probably the same for my pet. Like, I just prefer to follow that path in life, right? The less processed, the better. But that's a personal philosophy. I'm not saying there's research. Again, there's no longevity research to back that up. But anyone who goes to my profile, you'll see I cook for my dogs. And I encourage people who do feed Kibble to just add in fresh foods. I mean, that's a really simple way to just boost their antioxidant intake and make their food even healthier, like, no matter what they're feeding. I never want anybody to feel bad about what they're feeding, because I think that's really common as well. Like, even if you're feeding raw, maybe I don't necessarily recommend that. I'm never going to make somebody feel bad. I'm going to meet them where they're at and teach them how can we make that diet the safest, the most optimal, and the best that we can based on their budget, their preferences, their pet's needs. So it's really important to me to just meet people where they're at and like never alienate somebody based on what they feed. Educate and help is really where I come from.
So a lot of what you just said resonated with me because, so I'll go back to my shepherd when she had her ear infections. After my vet told me that, I thought I need to dive a little bit deeper into this. So I actually did take a pet nutrition course, and I read a lot of books written by veterinarians, and I learned basically everything you just said, where they were basically saying if you can't feed home cooked or raw meals, then just add healthy foods into your dog's kibble to help boost their immune system, basically. And then I did learn a lot about raw. So let's talk a little bit about raw. Why aren't you the biggest advocate of raw feeding?
Yeah, so for me, again, I'm a vet, right? So I am here to protect the interests of the pet, the health of the pet, but also people. Like we take an oath to protect public health. And when it comes to raw food, like we do actually have scientific evidence that pets have gotten sick from, bacterial contamination in the diets and even died from that. And so I don't have that evidence from a fresh cooked diet. So if I'm going to pick between the two, one that has little to no risk and one that has much higher risk, I'm going to pick the one with low risk from a medical standpoint. I want to keep that pet safe. So that's really where, in my opinion, where raw becomes not an option, I guess, for me.
So I'm gonna debate it a little bit because people in the comments are gonna debate this for sure.
Yes, it's hugely debated.
So I've been feeding raw for 13 years, and I have 4 dogs, and I had a shepherd that passed away. All of my dogs, except for one, he is my little Maltese Yorkie, he refused to eat it. He refuses to eat home cooked food. The only thing he'll eat is kibble. That's the only thing he'll eat. He's addicted to his dog food. He happens to be the only one out of all of them that's sick. He has IBD. So I am taking the correlation that this is not a coincidence, that it's more than likely because he's been eating commercial pet food his whole life, and the others have been eating a much more nutritious, easier digestible food. Now, been feeding raw for 13 years. I contacted you because my one Pomeranian has acid reflux. So I'm trying to figure out every raw diet I put her on, she still gets acid reflux. So I'm trying to figure out what I can feed her that will stop that. But other than that, they've never been sick from their food. They've never had diarrhea. They've never had vomiting. I've never had to bring them to the emergency clinic or to the vet, for example, for anything medically related. And it begs the question to me, if there's so much bacteria in raw food or could potentially be in raw food, how is it possible that over 13 years of my animals eating it, and I've had dogs that have passed away as well. I had a boxer that was on raw his whole life. My sister's dog's on raw his whole life. How is it that none of them have been sick? My only thought process is this. The food that I buy is prepared specifically for pets. Is it possible that those pets that have gotten sick are owners that are going to the grocery store, and now our meat that we eat is allowed to have a certain amount of bacteria in it because we cook it, right? So is it possible that these owners are going to the grocery store, they're buying raw food that really isn't for their pet, feeding it, and because it has this bacteria, it's causing a problem? I'm wondering if the pet food companies that are creating raw are putting more into it to ensure that there is no bacteria in that meat.
Yes. Yeah. Bingo. You pretty much stated it exactly correct. So I think that it's important that I do distinguish, like there's 2 types of raw, right? There's a DIY raw where you are going to the grocery store and kind of doing it all on your own. And then there's commercial raw. And commercial raw could be like you literally get the patties, or you get like instinct kibble based, raw type foods. And the raw that I'm referring to is like the DIY grocery store meat. So that is, yes, legally allowed to have bacteria. They assume we're going to, cook it to a safe internal temperature. We're not going to ingest the bacteria and the parasites. Whereas pet food is legally not allowed. Like they have to have it tested and make sure it's negative for pathogenic bacteria before it's sold. So I think that's most likely why a lot of pets like on commercial raw don't have an issue, but pets on homemade raw they may or may not. Like some dogs may be able to just pass it through and kind of become more of a carrier than like sick from it. But it's certainly going to be a risk for grocery store meat.
And I think that's very important for everybody listening to really listen to this. It's not that raw feeding is bad. It's that if you're doing it yourself and you're sourcing your foods from places that could have contamination, you run a high risk of getting your pet sick. So locally, I have companies that make raw, that deliver it right to your door. It's very high quality, and my pets do amazing on it. So I am also, though, an advocate for home cooked, because for me, in reality, the only reason why I'm truly an advocate of raw is because you don't have to add supplements to it to make it balanced. Where when you home cook, you have to add supplements. Am I correct?
You lose those vitamins.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, the home cooked, exactly. Yeah, because you're using heat, right? So you're going to lose some vitamins, minerals, things like that. Home or homemade raw, or just raw in general, like it is still going to generally need some type of supplement. I guess it's probably more likely that you're not, if you're doing like really good quality organ meats and bones and things like that. It's going to have calcium, but it's just important, like no matter what you're doing, to go with a company that's knowledgeable, who like has somebody who knows how to formulate these diets so that they are complete and balanced, and that test their food for the safety as well. That's the most important thing. But yeah, that's great points.
In your experience, what stories could you tell me of dogs that were kibble fed that switched to a home cooked diet and was able to overcome illnesses because of that switch of diet?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I've seen quite a bit of those too. So I've had pets, a lot of pets. The ones I see the most improvement in are pets with gut health issues and pets with skin allergies. I've seen dogs who literally are like on prescription drugs for allergies every single day not need those drugs anymore after switching to a fresh food diet. But it takes a long time. It takes generally at least 6 months, even up to a year, for the skin to kind of re-regulate itself. And then dogs who, like, no matter what kibble their parent fed to them, just like blow out diarrhea intermittently, like just really just messed up stomach in the vet all the time. And when we've switched to a well-balanced, properly formulated homemade recipe for the dog, we're not in the vet every single, 2 to 4 weeks with a GI upset episode. So I have seen it make a big difference in a lot of clients and their pets.
Allergies seems to be a massive issue amongst dogs. I'm going to say, and you tell me if I'm wrong, I'm going to say that's like the number one thing that people are going to the vet for is severe allergies in their pets.
Oh, yeah. Super common.
And people don't make the correlation that it is oftentimes food related. Like, not always, obviously, times it can be environmental as well. But as a groomer, the poor animals I've seen come in with horrific skin. It's sad. It's really sad.
I bet. It's and really uncomfortable for that animal too.
Well, and for the people,
It's
because
awful.
they're listening to their dog scratch all the time, cry, and they stink. They smell.
Yep.
They smell like yeast, right?
Yep.
I call it the Cocker Spaniel
Exactly. Yes. Oh, I know that scent very well.
Oh, God.
Especially being in Florida. I see it every day I'm in practice. I see multiple skin animals, so super common.
Another issue that I see is a lot of people thinking they're doing right by their dog by making a home cooked food or even a raw diet, and not understanding or recognizing that it's so important to get that diet balanced. And their response is usually, well, I don't eat a balanced meal every day, so my dog doesn't need to eat a balanced meal every day. What can you say to those people who, well, actually, the first thing I'm going to ask you is, what do you need for a diet to be balanced? And what would you tell people if you saw them making an not properly balanced meal?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I guess I'll start with your first point is, what do you need for a complete and balanced diet? And it's a lot more than I think most people think. They think like a meat, a carb and some vegetables, and like we're good, right? It's balanced. But a diet like that is going to be nutrient deficient in at least 10 things. And the most common ones are like our calcium, our zinc, vitamin D, copper, some of the like micro minerals and things like that. So you do need like an organ meat. Those are going to be nutrient dense, like beef liver is amazing, but it's still not going to fill in all the gaps. Calcium's still going to be deficient. So I almost always add a calcium. I wouldn't even say almost, I would say I always add a calcium supplement to my dog's diets. I use like seaweed calcium or eggshell calcium powder. And then on top of that, again, there's still going to be like little things that are deficient, maybe iodine, stuff like that. So there's going to be little supplements that have to be filled in, but it depends on the base recipe. Whatever the base recipe is determines the deficiencies, and then we have to customize and add things in to fill in those gaps. So there's a lot that goes into it. That's why you have to use a balancing software to know these things. But if somebody, what was your other question? If somebody, or what would I say to somebody that?
I think I have two questions, but what if you saw an improperly balanced meal, what would you tell someone to make them understand how dangerous it is? Because I don't think people realize how dangerous it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like we have to have the perspective that food is medicine, and a lot of us don't think that, especially in America. So I think educating on the fact that food is medicine. So every vitamin, every mineral is going to kind of act like a drug of some sort in the body, right? It could be toxic, it could be deficient. And then I actually show my clients. So I say, awesome, you're home cooking for your dog. I love that. Let's like put the ingredients into the software, and I'll pull it up on the computer and I'll show them this is like good for these things, but we're missing all of these things. So I like to give visuals, and like then I talk through each one. Like if this is deficient, this could happen with the bones, or their immune system's going to be deficient, things like that, just so they can see like, oh my gosh, this actually might impact my dog. And I also mentioned like it's not an overnight process. It may be 5-10 years down the line, and then you see the effects of the deficiency, or it could be acute. We don't know. It depends on which one it is, but it's often going to be a long-term process, and we want to prevent those issues from happening down the line.
I've heard a lot of people say that to me. I've been feeding this my dog's whole life. My dog is 12 years old, has never had a health problem. He's fine. So what are some types of illnesses, I guess I would say, or problems you see with pets that have been eating a deficient diet their whole life?
Yeah, I think it depends again on the deficiency. But we can see skin problems from things like zinc deficiencies, or just not having a good omega fatty acid profile. So we need to have the anti-inflammatory properties to the diet. So skin would be a huge one, or just their coat is kind of like lackluster, dry, or flaky. But even more serious, I mean, I've seen like kittens come in, a kitten whose owner was doing an unbalanced raw diet, like homemade DIY, and the kitten literally could not move. Like it was in so much pain, it couldn't even move at all. And we took an x-ray, all the bones in the entire body were like translucent because the cat was getting no calcium, a growing kitten. And it was reversible, thank God. Like we were able to reverse that with diet, but it can be really, really severe, or it can just be subtle where it's like the coat just doesn't look great, or their muscling's not great, or their energy's not great because their B vitamins are low. Like it can be things we don't even attribute to nutrition. We're like, oh, they're old, or that's just how it is. Like that's just normal, but it's actually probably food. And I think the nutrient deficiency related diseases are probably way underdiagnosed. Like we just don't think about it a lot of the times. It's probably so much more common and in people too than we're aware of.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add in regards to what you do, or in regards to nutrition, anything that you think that hasn't been mentioned?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing I harp on a lot is custom nutrition. Again, like the one size fits all thing is just not my philosophy. Like one of the things I hate the most is when people ask me, what brand do I feed? Like the brand is not what matters. Like the brand is cool and all, but like we need to know like how much protein is your dog getting? Like what nutrients do we need to boost to prevent your dog who's maybe prone to X, Y, or Z from getting that disease. Like we can do things early on to prevent issues in the future. I don't like to be reactive with nutrition where it's like, oh, you're sick, what do we prescribe you? Like let's be proactive and start young, get the dog on a custom diet, that's appropriate to their breed and their unique needs. And we can really like make such a huge impact in that animal's life. So that's my favorite part of what I do, for sure.
Yeah, what you do is amazing. And again, thank you on behalf of all pet owners
Thank you.
that you are
Of
advocating for
course.
their health. Because again, far too many vets that I've gone to that, just tell you to buy this food. Actually, you know what? This is a good question, which a lot of people think. I forgot about this question. I see this question, I go on TikTok and I read the comments from people's videos, and this question constantly comes up. Or not question, more so statement, that veterinarians get a kickback from food companies, and that's why they advertise those companies.
So I've heard it all the time. I have heard it all the time. No, like we sell the food in the clinic because pets need it oftentimes right then and there. We don't sell it to get rich. Really, no vet is rich anyway. We don't make that much money. But typically we're just going to have like we're going to have certain prescription diets in the clinic because number one, most clients feed kibble because of the convenience and the price. And that's just like most appropriate for their lifestyle and what they can do. And so that's just the reality, right? Is like a lot of pets do have to have the prescription diets when they have the issue because the pet parent can't do much else other than that. And that's okay because I've seen literally diets save animals' lives, like cats who have a urinary blockage and they're on a prescription urinary diet who like their life is saved, right? So not a bad thing, but that's why they're there, so that I can say, your cat has this urinary issue. Let me send you with this canned food that's going to help them. And that way they're sent on their way, but they're also welcome to get it at the pet store so that they know we're not making any money from it. I'm still going to recommend it in those certain cases. But yeah, I think that's a super common misconception. But I will say the reason veterinarians recommend Royal Canin Hills, Purina, I don't know if I'm allowed to say names on this, but the reason that you hear those names so repetitively is just because of the science behind the brands. Like vets want science, right? But there's a lot of research out there from other brands that are amazing as well. So there's other options, but I think that's why people hear it so much, because we want foods that like do research on their products and are medically beneficial for the pet.
I want to go back to your statement where you said vets aren't rich, because I think that is another huge misconception amongst pet owners. So if you're comfortable answering
Absolutely.
this question, not you personally, but what would you say the average veterinarian in the United States makes a year after taxes?
Yeah, average. I mean, I haven't been an associate, like I said, for, oh my gosh, like 5 years now. So I'm kind of out of touch maybe with what it is now. But I think for a new grad, like somebody fresh out of vet school, they'll probably make a little over 100,000 would be my guess. And it goes up, of course, like with your experience, but that's average, I think. Of course, there's going to be ones that make less. Like when I graduated, I made 60 grand a year with $250,000 of debt. So the ratio is awful, right? Like human doctors make like 3-4 times as much as we do, and we will never pay our loans back. So we're kind of chained to those, but it's not a lot.
And it's sad because not only did you go to school for a million years with all of this debt, but you actually know more than doctors know, because you have to know so many different species. You don't just know one, right? It drives me crazy when people complain about the cost of veterinary care and they say like, these vets just want our money. And I'm like, you have no idea. Like you literally have no idea how much they actually make, which like, sure, over 100,000 sounds like a lot of money, but not for what you guys studied for. Like that's outrageous to me. That makes me physically sick to hear that. Like,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. And that's the thing too. I think a lot of people don't understand, like vets, we go into this knowing that we are going to be in debt for the rest of our lives. And like, we wouldn't do that if we thought if we were doing it for the money, we would go and be a human doctor, because it's the same amount of time. I was in school for 9 years. This is not like a 2-year program. Like, it's a decade of my life, like, committed, and like a mortgage of debt, right? So I think there's just a lot of misconceptions about that. Um, but yeah, we certainly don't make enough for the debt we're in, and what we do.
I also want to circle back to what you mentioned about cats and crystals and how there's specific diets that they have to have, otherwise they can get blockages. And the reason I'm going to mention this is because years and years and years ago, long before I knew about nutrition, I had a cat that got crystals. And I had to place her on the veterinary prescription diet, and she was on that. It worked. She never got crystals again, but she got really fat. Even with reducing her diet, she got really fat. So I did some research, and correct me if I'm wrong, because this was a very long time ago. I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly. But the research stated that these foods are very high in sodium, which encourage the cat to drink more water to prevent them from getting crystals. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's one big factor of the diet, is like driving them to drink so that their urine is more dilute. But also, like, that changes the pH of the urine too, so the crystals can't form as easily. So, but yeah, sodium's a big factor. I think like overfeeding in general is going to be the primary issue. But I've seen that a lot with the prescription diet. Yeah, weight gain rapidly.
I ended up switching her to raw, and then I just added water to her food, and she never got crystals again for the rest of her life. So it is right. It is something to think about in regards to, okay, yes, this prescription diet worked, but are there better alternatives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, if somebody can, like, they have the capability to cook for their dog or their cat, or even just the financial ability to do a fresh food diet that's formulated properly for cats, I think that's an amazing alternative. I don't personally do like urinary diets, so I can't really speak too much to like those custom diets. But I do think like diet, I'm sure, I mean, it's got to be a factor, right? Diet affects everything in our bodies. But there's a lot of other factors too, like the stress that cats can experience. I actually have a cat right now. One of our cats is dealing with the same thing. So stress is a big factor too. So it's like we have to look at the cat holistically and like do a lot of different things. But I do think diet is incredibly important as well.
Now, we're going to get off the topic of nutrition. Bulldogs, pugs, their breeds are...
Oh,
I always
brachycephalic.
Okay, I always say that wrong, so I'm glad that you said that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about them and how you feel just about them in general, and what needs to change in your opinion for them to be healthier pets.
Whew, man, I could go on for a while about this. Well, French bulldogs are the most popular breed now in America, number one. And so I see these a lot. I see them a lot in practice, and most of them have issues. They've got skin problems, they've got breathing problems, they've got joint problems. Like, there's always something going wrong with them. So genetically, like, they're just not being bred properly. They're being bred for their appearance and not their health. And so I just feel like that's just so unethical, first and foremost, but also just unfair for that dog. Like, to live that life of just honestly misery for a lot of them. Like, their skin is constantly inflamed and their face folds are infected and they're getting ulcers on their eyes and dry eye. And like, it's just awful, like the things I see. So I think breeders, like they need to take better responsibility for like actually only breeding dogs with good genetics and like longer snouts, than not so much the flat face. And just like, yeah, being ethical about what they're doing. But from like a vet standpoint, I always like, anytime anybody is thinking about getting one of these dogs, I'm like, I'm just going to let you know all the things they're predisposed to. And if you're gung-ho on getting one, like, get pet insurance if they'll cover them, and be prepared. Like, they are not cheap. I've seen them need hundreds, thousands of dollars of work right off the bat after adoption. So it can be a lot.
What, in your opinion, would be the best dog for, let's say, a family? If a family came in and said, hey, I'm getting a dog, what breed should I get? What are the breeds that you would recommend?
Well, I guess it depends on their lifestyle and their financial situation as well. I mean, any dog's going to be a financial investment, but if you don't really have time or money for like a lot of upkeep, definitely get a short-haired dog. Do not get a long-haired dog that needs grooming, because that can be quite expensive. You know how it is, but it can add up, and they have to go frequently to maintain it. And I've seen a lot of dogs with, like, I know you've seen it too, right? Long hair that's like overgrown and matted, and it's just awful. So just be realistic with like what you can keep up with, but also energy levels. If you mostly like to hang out on the couch, don't get a border collie or a German shepherd. So honestly, the answer I'm going to give you is going to sound very biased and ridiculous, but I would like to say a Chihuahua.
I love Chihuahuas.
Because honestly, they're the best. Like, they're just so sweet. Like, they get a bad rep. Like, they're really not as mean as everybody thinks they are, and they're tiny, so they don't eat a lot of food, and they don't need a ton of exercise. So they're a little bit more like low maintenance. They do need dental care. That's like the big thing. But I honestly would say a Chihuahua. But I also have a Chihuahua and a Chihuahua mix. So
what about from a health standpoint, if we're looking at healthy breeds?
yeah, healthy breeds. Oh gosh. I mean, it's hard for me to like, I'm just thinking of all the ones that like aren't healthy. The ones that I do see a lot of, right? Mutts, really. I mean, a mutt is going to be your best bet. They're less likely to have those genetic predispositions. So if you want something like less likely to have chronic issues, I'd go with a mutt.
For me, the two breeds that come to mind when I think about little health problems and long lifespans are Chihuahuas and Bichon Frise. I swear to God, Bichon Frise don't die. They live forever.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Chihuahuas definitely have like the longest lifespan of what I see. So with minimal health issues like heart disease when they're old and dental disease.
I just groomed one the other day. Yeah. I've been grooming him for years. He's 20. He's 20 and he runs. He runs like it's unbelievable when I look at this dog. It. He has no teeth, but whatever.
I love it.
So cute.
Yes. They are little powerhouses. Yep. I'm telling you. I love them.
And if your least favorite breed, and this is not in regards to recommendations to other people, but you as a vet working with dogs, I know that you have some dogs that are not your favorite. Doesn't mean that you hate them, but they're still on that, I would never get one of these.
Yeah. The list, there's quite a few. But when I'm I'm working and I see it on the appointment list, the one that just makes me go, oh no, is a German Shepherd, because they hate going to the vet most of the time.
I'm so mad.
They're big and they're hard to deal with. They're really hard to deal with because they're so big and they jump around a lot, and it's just, I'm sweating by the end of the appointment. So I have to say they're the most difficult to work with.
It's so surprising for me to hear that, because you're not the first vet that's told me that. It's just so surprising because as a groomer, I've worked with shepherds for years. I would never place them on that list. I don't know if that's because
it must just be the vet. Like, they hate us.
I have a theory. The theory is that most people that book grooming appointments, they wouldn't bring their shepherd if they think it's going to be aggressive or very difficult for grooming, because they don't actually really require grooming. So I think that the majority of the people that bring them in for grooming, they know, okay, my dog will be able to tolerate this. I'm assuming. At the vet clinic, you have no choice. The vet has to see every dog, right? Yeah. And the other reason why it surprises me is because I had a German Shepherd. She passed away a couple years ago. I have another one now, and they are angels at the vet. Now, obviously, that can also have to do with training, right? Training and socialization plays a huge part. I think the wrong people are getting this working breed thinking it's going to be easy to train. They're easy to train, but they require a lot of physical attention and mental stimulation. And if you don't meet those needs, the wrong people are getting the German Shepherd.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, because they're bred to do a job. Like they're gonna be bored out of their mind as a couch potato dog, and then they're gonna be like crazy. Like they're gonna have anxiety and like mental issues. Like if they're not worked and they don't get their energy out. So we see a lot of that. But I do see ones that you can tell like the client really put a lot of work into the dog and like they do a lot of daily things with the dog to keep it happy and I can see the difference for sure.
Yeah.
I like the calm ones.
And the last topic we're going to get in today, because you focus on nutrition, you're a little bit more open-minded than most vets. So the next topic is going to be vaccinations. And what I really want to speak about is obviously there's laws and we have to get the rabies vaccination. That's just the way that it is, no matter pretty much anywhere you are in the world. But there's other vaccines. I personally do not vaccinate my dogs after puppyhood. The rabies vaccine, I get titer testing done, and that's it. I don't vaccinate anything else for the rest of their life. What are your opinions on that, thoughts on that? How do you feel about vaccination?
Yeah, it's a tough one, honestly. Like, I mean, I don't blame you for your viewpoint on that because I do think that vaccines last longer than, a year. Like, they're not wearing off after a year, but without titer testing, we don't know. And a lot of people can't afford titer testing for everything, like distemper and parvo and rabies and all the things. So sometimes it's just a lot more economical for people to vaccinate and then know, like, my dog's protected. I don't have to worry about it. So that's one aspect. But I also, with vaccines, I think it's really important to do these based on lifestyle. Like my dogs never see another dog. Like they'll see them far away on a walk, but like we do not go to dog parks, boarding, nothing. So I don't give them Bordetella. Like they're never going to see a dog. I don't give them influenza. So we do have to individualize that for the dog. If I have a client whose dog goes to the dog bar downtown every day and like is around all these dogs and they can't titer test, I'm going to recommend a distemper parvo and a Bordetella and all the things to like keep their dog protected. So it just depends on the pet. It shouldn't be every single dog that comes in. We need to give them every vaccine. Like, I just don't think that's appropriate. We've got to tailor it to the individual dog.
When it comes to distemper and parvo, if puppies are vaccinated at the appropriate times, do they need to continue with these vaccinations? How likely is it for an adult dog who has been vaccinated in puppyhood to actually get distemper or parvo?
Yeah, I have never seen it happen. Like a dog who has been vaccinated in their younger years or as puppy. I haven't seen it. Doesn't mean it hasn't ever happened. But I think, of course, it's less likely. So they're going to have the immunity and we don't really know exactly how long are the vaccines lasting. It's going to depend on the animal. Some titers are going to drop very quickly. Others are not. So it depends, but.
Well, thank you for that information. I think that's good for people to hear because, again, a lot of vets, when you go, you have to get every single one of these vaccines. And it's true. Again, pets are individuals. And I think that medical needs need to be tailored to each individual pet as well. So thank you for that info.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just one other point on that is like at our annual visits, we need to be emphasizing blood work as a priority. So like, don't skimp on the blood work just to get the vaccines done. We got to know what's going on inside that dog because they can't tell us or the cat. So blood work is huge, super important.
I think we've reached our time limit. We've been talking for an hour now, so that just flew by. Thank you so much, Hillary.
Of course. Thank you. So fun to talk to you.
It was very nice to have you on the podcast. I'm sure that a lot of people have learned a lot. Again, I appreciate the work that you're doing. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so most people find me on Instagram. It's Dr. Wolfe with an E .dvm. And you can also go to my website, which is Tula, Tula, vetnutrition.com and check out my services.
Be sure to follow her on social media. And if you guys are interested in making homemade meals for your pet, this is definitely the vet to check out. All right, everyone. So that's it for today's episode. A huge thank you to Hillary for joining me today and giving much needed education to my audience. Tune in next week for a very funny episode where my friends are going to read negative comments about me and get my reaction. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll see you next week for another episode of Talk Your Tail Off.